I heard a general theme that we feel like we're the tail wagging the dog. And we want to be upfront in this conversation and in this process. So now is the time to capture that specifically. What would you like to see in terms of transportation-related equity concerns and community needs? So there are 2 questions. They're on the worksheets. We're asking you to fill those out and also put Post-it notes with some of your thoughts. The most critical thing, you might have 10 things you want to write down, but what is the one thing that you think is really going to make a critical difference? I heard Anna say something at the very first question. So how are you going to build a process when you ask the people who are most affected to come in at the 11th hour? That might be number 1 for me, I'm just saying. But you might have some other things. We want to know, what is your most critical thing? List out all your concerns on the worksheet, but on the Post-it, what is the biggest thing that you want to make sure the TCI addresses? It doesn't mean we won't include all of them, but what's the big thing? And then we're going to ask, we might not get to every table, but we're going to ask somebody to report out, what are those big picture things, right? So be prepared for that. And we're going to ask random tables to support to do that. So you have 2 questions. They're on your worksheet. Please begin to talk to each other, talk about that, and work through the worksheets as you eat. Thank you. And it's okay to chew and talk with your mouth full in this circumstance, because otherwise we'll never get it done. Thank you. This is what I propose. We do the odd number tables to report out in this session, and the even number tables to report out in the second session, which is going to be right after the next panel. We are collecting all this information. You did not do this for naught. We are collecting all of it. This is the foundation of the summary of the report. So we really need your post-it notes, and we're going to collect all of it. So if I could get table 1 to go, then table 3, table 5, table 7, table 9, right? Table 11, table 1 in the back. They need a microphone. The mics are coming. All the way in the back in the corner, far right corner is the table 1. Which one is table 1? Far right, far back, right? Sorry, table 1. So sorry.
I have microphones at table 1.
All right.
Thank you. So we're table 1 back here.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, we can do this in 2 minutes. So for the first question, what are transportation-related equity concerns and challenges in your community? We kind of came to a consensus agreement and tied together a lot of threads that came up and said that the number one concern would be lack of involvement from communities in proximity to transportation emissions in the process. So we had questions of process and questions about, or concerns about high levels of emissions. So we tied those two together.
So hold on a second. How many people in the room resonate with that position from table 1? Hands up. Okay, next one.
Okay, and so for question 2, we again tied a lot of us said almost the same things, and what we came up with was that a regional cap and invest program needs to address the legacy pollution in the most burdened communities by guaranteeing emissions reductions and prioritizing regional baseline for large percent of investments in the most burdened communities and soon to be burdened communities.
How many people in the room resonate with that perspective? Putting up 2 hands. All righty. Thank you so much. Now, you know, there's so much more that they talked about, right? But these were, you're given a high level, you know, the things you want to make sure everybody hears. But we're going to collect it all. Table 3.
We had a lot of discussion, the first question about, actually our answers were somewhat similar to both of them. The first is a lot of questions, access to public transit, although we did note that unlike 95% of the country, everyone at the table has public transit to get to work, which so we was cautious about that being representative or valuable to.
So there must have been nobody from Baltimore at your table, because everybody in Baltimore cannot get to work via public transit.
Oh, well, I know people in Baltimore take transit, but and then some questions about emphasizing of cars rather than mobility in general by the dots. And
wait, say that one again.
The Departments of Transportation often emphasize the movement of cars rather than mobility in general.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then question 2.
So question 2, sort of a couple of people talking about figuring out how to integrate the TCI goals with issues outside of transportation and climate, you know, so reducing not only carbon but other pollutants, not only from the transportation sector but from other sectors, and some way to integrate that all together. And then fertilizing the social cost of carbon in general, and my phone is green, which is great. So I think that's probably enough for now.
How many people resonate with those 2 recommendations from table 3? Thank you. Table 5.
Over here. We had many of the similar concerns that were raised, but I'm going to add to the conversation an emphasis on the importance of training and jobs, that as we transition to new technologies, that there need to be opportunities for our workforce to be able to work on those vehicles or the new technologies that come about, and that we should emphasize having them being built in the U.S. by U.S. workers. Another really important concept from our group was the development of capacity and engaging a community to care. Given a history of distrust, that's really essential. And the third major point I would make is that the money needs to follow health and legacy concerns. We built on that in our second question, where we had a whole slew of thoughts about the fact that if funding has been disproportionate, or if there are negative impacts disproportionate in the community, then our funding to correct that needs to be of equal disproportionate emphasis in a positive way.
How many people resonate with those two points of view? All right, thank you. Table 7.
And they passed the mic.
Remember, we said it was okay to chew and try to talk in this session.
I even grabbed some food. I'm like, I don't want to talk. But karma always hits. So when it comes to question number 1, our biggest concern was making sure that we focus on gentrification, we focus on congestion, car dependence, and limited options, reach the community centered, and also making sure that funding is across the board. And then we look at access and planning before and after a natural disaster. So we can all
Part of the decision-making process early on.
early on, correct. Sorry. I think another thing was support local businesses, and with that we even included small businesses and minority-owned businesses. We also talked about workers and training, better understanding baseline emission, the equity. And so
One
forth.
idea.
I don't know, they're all scattered, so
Thank you.
I'm just reading them.
Thank you so much. So just, how many people resonate with those recommendations from Table 7? And just one thing that he said that I just wanted to highlight, the Washington Post did a series that found that transit-oriented development is the biggest driver of gentrification in Washington, D.C., which is the most gentrified city in the United States, according to the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. So we, from a smart growth perspective, we believe, and I think there's a lot of truth, that transit-oriented development is a great thing, but it's also displacing a lot of people who live near those transit routes and transportation corridors. We might need a rethink of that, how to do that equitably, right? Table 9.
Good afternoon. We had a lot of different aspects in our tables, but there were 3 points. Question 1 is access to transit, funding, and community engagement. So, access issues should be equitable and affordable, reliable, provided funding operating costs for low-income communities. Community engagement, the community should all be involved in the process.
Thank you.
Question number 2. Minimal baseline of community investment across the region, neighborhood-specific data and reductions, and community participation and policy-making decisions.
Thank you. How many people resonate with those recommendations? Thank you. Table 9, right? And now we're at Table 11.
So we had a lot of the similar thoughts and thoughts. So for question number 1, we talked a lot about accessibility and mobility. So in addition to having access to the transportation system, where's that going to get you? So making sure that all parties can get to their jobs or healthcare or grocery stores. And then for question number 2, we spent a lot of time talking about accountability of the funds, ensuring that there's language within this legislation, this commitment that ensures that a line like the funds should be spent on public good. That's not good enough. Ensuring that EJ communities are really getting most of these funds, as well as enforceability. So these, what's going to happen if the funds aren't going to where they're supposed to go? And I do want to reiterate Doc Nicky over here, he was talking a lot about these policies need to be thought about at this point before the structure is in place. So reiterating that where the money is going towards, what we're going to be using that for, should be happening before the actual funding is in place. Yeah, the policy, yeah, right? Policy should be developed before.
Thank you. How many people read what we heard from table 11? All right, let me ask a different question. How many people in the room do not resonate with the recommendations that we've heard from the table so far? How many people think we're just out of our skulls here? All right, that's a really good measure. So in the next round after this panel, we're going to do tables 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. Okay, so we're going to hear from them in the next round. If I could ask Dorothy Morrison to come up so we can start this last panel. Dorothy Morrison is the director of the Office of Environment at the Maryland Department of Transportation. Before that, Dorothy was the director of environmental justice and sustainable communities for the Maryland Department of the Environment, where she forced me to get on the Maryland Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities for 13 years. Thank you very much. Dorothy Morrison, introduce your panel.
Let me get organized here. So we're going to try our best as possible to catch up on time, but good afternoon to everyone and welcome back from lunch. Like I said, I'm Dorothy Morrison, and oops, just organize this a little bit. So before we get started, I'd like to thank everyone for your participation and engagement and hard work through the morning sessions. This morning, we talked about the potential regional Cap and Invest program, suggestions for improving the community engagement process of the program, and started to discuss and better understand the equity implications, including how the program may impact and provide opportunities for frontline communities. In the final panel roundtable discussion for lunch, we heard about challenges communities face related to transportation equity and environmental justice. We also touched on a few other policy areas in the individual table discussion, members of those communities. To build on the discussion we've been having today, we now turn to a discussion of transportation investments and potential policy that can help communities to develop solutions for those challenges. So before I introduce the panel, I wanted to acknowledge and reiterate the importance of understanding the history and context of these transportation policy investments, recognizing that many communities around the country, including frontline communities, bearing a disproportionate burden of transportation pollution, are communities that have historically not received sufficient transportation investment, which affects, obviously, access to economic and social opportunities, and has further compounded other challenges and inequities that communities face today. This panel will look at opportunities to develop community-driven investments and strategies to address our transportation and equity challenges. I am joined today by policy leaders, academic researchers, and community advocates. The panelists will share ideas for specific programs and complementary policies, including ideas for how potential Cap and Invest proceeds can be invested. We'll also discuss how communities can be involved in developing investment strategies at the regional, state, and local levels. Following the panel discussion, everyone will have an opportunity again at the individual tables to share thoughts, investment priorities, and policies to benefit communities that are most in need. For those participating via live stream, I just wanted to let everyone know there's the ability to provide comments online, which will obviously go on record and be part of this meeting. So now to introduce the panelists, we have with us Charles Brown, who is the senior researcher with the Alan M. Voorhees Transportation Center, Anna Batista, who's the chair of Environmental Policy and Sustainability Management Program and professor of professional practice with the Newark. And we have Karen Whitman, Senior Manager, Center for Sustainable Energy. Nick Cifuentes, hope I didn't mess up the name, who's the Executive Director for Tri-State Transportation Campaign. We also have Sarah Lee, who's a Transit and Environmental Justice Organizer with Green Roots. I will now turn it over to the panelists to give the opening presentation, and we've been asked to sort of cut it down to about hopefully 5 minutes apiece. And as time permits, I will pose some questions to spur further discussion among the panelists, if time permits.
Good afternoon, everyone. As a self-proclaimed street-level researcher, I've dedicated much of my career towards increasing the safety and mobility of residents throughout the U.S. and abroad, regardless of race, ethnicity, age, income, sexual identity and preference, gender, and ability. I've done this, and I have my notes here. I've done this through emphasizing the importance of prioritizing investments in transit, walking, and biking as alternative modes of transport to personal vehicles. As of late, however, my research, policy, and planning efforts locally and nationally have led me to focus more specifically at the intersection of transportation, health, and equity. And when it comes to equity, it has led me to focus on the importance in equity in transportation and in the transportation decision-making process as a whole. I've come to discover through my learnings that yes, the prioritization of investments in transit, biking, and walking is of great importance. However, the question still remains, where and who, and when and how, which communities will benefit or be victims of such investments? My learnings have guided me to emphasize in discussions around equity that there must be three main elements of equity for it to be meaningful for us all. First, equity, or the understanding of equity, is about giving people what they need to enjoy full, healthy lives. Secondly, with equity, there must be the presence of justice and fairness within the procedures, the processes, and most importantly, the distribution of resources. Lastly, though, and this is the discussion that is not had enough, is that equity requires an understanding of the underlying root causes of inequities and oppression within society. This is important because as we fight for more investments in active transportation and the reduction in harmful emissions, we must disaggregate and strategically address the needs of all populations. This, however, is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Communities near and far believe that we have weaponized transportation as a tool of oppression. With that, of course, while that, of course, is debatable, yes, debates are healthy, we cannot ignore these simple facts. Nationally, between 2008 and 2017, drivers struck and killed 49,000 people on our roadways. That's 13 people per day, or one person every 1 hour and 46 minutes. In New Jersey, one person is killed every 2 days on our roadway. And we have some of the most advanced police policies in the nation. We're in fact leading the nation, and that has been done by our Department of Transportation, which is not done in many states. But nationally, older adults, seniors, and persons walking through these communities are more likely to be victims of fatal crashes. This, however, does not have to be the case. If we're serious, really serious about equity, we must keep in mind fundamentally that any system that is not diverse and inclusive is inherently biased. A lot of wisdom has been shared today. I've enjoyed listening to it, but please remember that as we move forward with TCI, wisdom without compassion is ruthless. Thank you for your time.
So now we'll have Anna Batista.
Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to challenge this idea of falling behind on the agenda, because I think we're actually moving forward the discussion in a real way for the first time. as from my perspective in TCI. So this is, to me, this is an investment in time well spent, and time that probably should have been spent and invested much earlier in this process. And I want to commend the environmental justice advocates and the New Jersey DEP who were willing to come together and really reshape the agenda of this meeting, which looked quite different when it was first proposed. And I know some of you were at the Boston meeting on April 30th, and you will notice that the discussion, the tenor, the composition of the panels that we have today look quite different. And that is a direct result of the kind of collaboration that can happen when states open up the process in a meaningful way and invite true community-led voices into this space to help shape and produce better outcomes, empirically better outcomes. So it might feel like we're going slower, but we're actually making tremendous strides forward. So thank you to all of you who helped shape today's agenda. So I'm just going to reiterate a couple of points that you've already heard today. I'm so glad that Bernice mentioned the space that you're in right now. When I was a kid, Central High School did not look like this for the children who most needed it. And the fact that millions of dollars have been poured into this beautiful building, and that those children that for many generations attended Central High are not experiencing this space speaks to the kinds of investments that we sometimes make that don't always benefit the people who need it most. And so that is true definitely in the transportation context. EJ communities, LMI communities spend a disproportionate amount of their household income on transportation. It's the second highest expense that they have after housing. Environmental justice communities typically have less access to all transportation modes. 40% of Newark residents don't have access to a personal vehicle. EJ communities, as many of you have already heard and know well, are impacted the most by all emissions, including transportation sector emissions. Right here in Newark, we are impacted by highways, seaports, airports, freight and logistics hubs. All of the different kinds of myriad emissions you can imagine are concentrated in communities that are already overburdened and vulnerable. EJ communities have traditionally benefited the least from transportation investments. Things like highways, TOD, commuter rail, we have not seen the benefits of those investments in infrastructure. And when those investments are made, like in transportation-oriented development, they often serve to displace and further harm and exacerbate the legacy of racist transportation planning and zoning policies that continue to be felt. Let us not make TCI an extension and an exacerbation of that legacy. Market mechanisms. The reason why there's a stress from the EJ community around market mechanisms is from experience. RGGI and AB 32, and if you go to Europe, you can ask people there, have not traditionally benefited communities of color and low-income communities, either on the emission side or on the investment side. So we have actual evidence that bears that out, and we can talk more about that later. And then community-driven solutions, well, there are so many. So I'm going to challenge the premise of this whole panel, which is that we are to come forward with ideas for Cap and Invest. Our job here is not to improve Cap and Invest and make Cap and Invest work. Our job, our responsibility, and I'm speaking to all of us, including the states, is to ensure that we tackle climate change and that we tackle environmental injustice. Okay, and that our job is to look at all the policy options and judge them on their merit and see which of these options are going to get us to reductions in emissions, not just of greenhouse gases, but of health-harming co-pollutants in the communities that need it most and the quickest. And Cap and Invest can sit alongside lots of policies. We heard today about container fees, congestion pricing, mandatory emissions reductions, zero emission zones, in-use diesel engine standards, millionaires tax, shipper fees, anti-idling, and there are many, many more. And so let's talk about all of these policies, and let's not limit ourselves to one set of policies. And lastly, principles. There are so many principles, but let's not recreate new ones. We have principles. We have the environmental justice principles, we have the HEMES principles, we even have principles that were laid out by allies in the Climate Justice Alliance movement. And so we have principles. One of the key things that we need to remember is that consultation is not decision-making power. Let's look up oldie but goodie, Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation. We are at the point on that ladder of consultation and co-option at best. We want to get to the real decision-making power and sharing that power, and that's when we get to decision-making. And lastly, I'll say, putting a plug for states to slow down their process. Take the time, as DEP did, to reach out to those communities that you know are in the front lines that are impacted, and work with them directly in this process to engage them in real solutions. So it's worth it, because in the end, you'll get an empirically better process.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to welcome Karen.
You have some slides. So first I want to thank you for the opportunity to join my voice today to this wonderful conversation. I'm with the Center for Sustainable Energy. We have the pleasure and honor of supporting a number of electric vehicle infrastructure, and what am I doing wrong? And auto dealer programs in support of NYSERDA, the Connecticut DEP, Mass DOER, and in California, we support the California Vehicle Rebate Program and the California Electric Vehicle Incentive Program. So that's just sort of a bit to begin. Yes. So Greta Thunberg, the young climate activist, says we need to act like our house is on fire, because it is. In a different time and about a different issue, MLK said, we are faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. Wild horses dying in Australia from heat and thirst may seem distant, yet this image from this January laid bare the stark reality that is upon us. Extracting, transporting, and burning fossil fuels to power our transportation system is harmful to human health, inefficient, and unaffordable. In an alternate universe where vehicles are powered by renewable electricity, we could travel the same distances at about a third the cost. Imagine if nearly $270 billion stayed in consumers' pockets, not just for 1 year, but year after year. The economic imperative to get off fossil fuels is rivaled only in import by the increasing gulf between the haves and the have-nots, and the systems that hold us to the status quo. History can provide us with some guidance, and I'd like to thank Charles for bringing it up on our call, that this notion of history being important. When the last trolley car was burned in downtown Burlington, Vermont in 1929, it was to usher in a new era that held the promise of freedom. Freedom to travel when you wanted, where you wanted, as fast as you wanted, and to be able to park at the front door. There was a time when rural residents had access to passenger trains 2 or 3 times a day. 80% of Vermonters still live within walking distance of a railroad, and yet those railroads were torn up in place of interstates, which did tear apart rural communities and farms. Rural residents are on average older and less racially diverse. Fewer are employed, more are disabled. Home values are lower, fewer are insured, there are more veterans, a higher poverty rate, and lower income levels. With limited or no access to public transportation, whether in the form of rail or bus, rural residents rely on personal vehicles. And they travel in those cars on average 10 miles more per day than their urban counterparts. With lower income levels, the average vehicle age is also older. Those extra miles lead to more spending on transportation, up to 38% more than urban residents. Now, there's lots of definitions of rural. The main one is it's not urban, with urban being defined as an area with a population over 50,000. People live in rural communities in every state of the nation, even in our most urbanized ones. The two extremes of the rural-urban spectrum are found among TCI states, which makes this an interesting place to have some common ground found between rural and urban conversations. Rural America is home to the nation's 2 million farms and almost all the wind development. Demographers predict that in 20 years, 70% of Americans will live in just 15 states, and thus will be represented by 30 senators, leaving the remaining 70 senators to represent just 30% of the population. And that population will be predominantly rural. Transportation solutions that can bridge this rural-urban divide have great potential. When transportation solutions are discussed, many rural residents and policymakers express concern that the solutions will be geared to urban areas and that they won't work in a rural setting. A system that ensures that investments are made in local solutions and not one size fits all are critical to gaining the trust and buy-in of rural residents. Many of the transportation challenges and solutions in rural areas are similar to those in urban settings. Increasing funding for bike lanes, sidewalks, and shoulders can help in some areas and for some people. Increasing public transit services to rural residents who tend to be older and more likely to be disabled will improve quality of life. Coordinating between the 62 federal programs that fund transportation services, primarily for older adults, people with disabilities, and low-income individuals, can increase efficiency and reveal new transportation options. Increasing support for commuter van pools can improve employment opportunities. And ride-hailing services require a level of connectivity that is not found in all rural areas. Increasing broadband access can increase transportation options. Increasing support for intercity bus and regional passenger rail can enable rural residents to access larger transportation networks. And we must electrify everything. We need a rapid replacement of vehicles which are polluting, inefficient, and costly. Rural residents who have no options but to rely on their car to get to work can be one repair away from losing their job. Electric vehicles with fewer moving parts, no oil changes, and cheaper operating costs can be a good solution for auto-dependent populations. For an EV incentive program to be successful, all populations need to be aware of and able to access the incentives. Involving community-based organizations in the program design is essential. Having community-based organizations promote the program is critical. Providing greater investments in outreach to hard-to-reach communities is necessary. To accelerate the transition, we need to rapidly turn new EVs into used EVs. Incentives for people with low and moderate incomes, those that we call rebate essential, are needed. And note that rebate essential participants are different. And we can think to a future where we have been relieved of the health and economic burdens of our current system. To finish the MLK quote I began, this is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action.
Thanks, Karen, for sharing with us the rural perspective. Nick Sheffield will be our next presenter.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Cifuentes. I'm the Executive Director of the Tri-State Transportation Campaign. I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Tri-State is a 25-year-old organization dedicated to improving transit and transportation options in the Tri-State region. That's New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And I want to start by saying that we all recognize that equity must go beyond how the revenues from TCI are spent, but that if the revenues are not spent equitably, and with a focus on communities that have long borne the brunt of pollution and lack of access to transit and active transportation, then we will have failed. So I wanted to share a few ideas that we've had on how to do that based on work that we've been engaged in the tri-state region over the last several years. And the first thing I'll say is that where TCI revenues are concerned, we need to make sure that those revenues are reinvested into transit systems across the TCI region. We have seen in state after state, even states where large numbers of commuters rely on transit every single day, disinvestment in systems over the last several decades. The end result of that has been service cuts that disproportionately impact communities of color, low-income communities, and transit-dependent communities first. In 2010, the MTA in New York City cut multiple bus lines and subway service that impacted hundreds of thousands of riders every single day. We just engaged in a fight this year to get $60 billion in funding for the MTA through congestion pricing. But we haven't raised the full amount of revenue necessary. The scale of the dollar amounts speak to the amount of disinvestment that we're dealing with that is a current and ongoing crisis in our transportation system. Here in New Jersey, we have a similar problem. Lack of investment in New Jersey Transit has left the agency taking money out of their capital budget to put into their operations budget to the tune of over $400 million every single year. The impact of that is severe. It means that capital expansion projects that need to go into communities that desperately need more transit service aren't happening. And with the potential for declines in gas tax revenues that will absolutely impact transportation agencies around the country, we need to make sure that TCI revenue is front-loaded into the transit agencies that desperately need the revenue to expand service to communities that need it. Along with expanding service, I want to point out, when we talk about expanding service, a lot of people think about rail infrastructure. It's incredibly important that we expand our bus networks first. They're cheaper, it's easier, and they'll go into communities that desperately need service now, not in 5 years and not in 10 years. And hand in hand with increasing access to bus service is making sure that we electrify those fleets at the same time. And so ensuring that agencies in the TCI region commit to real electrification goals is a critical component of our work. In New York, we're glad that the MTA has committed to transitioning their entire fleet of nearly 6,000 buses to zero emissions buses by 2040. We need to see that same commitment in other states. That's going to require the revenues to ensure not only that they can purchase new electric buses, but that they can electrify depots and charging points throughout the routes of these buses as well. So we think it's incredibly important to move as quickly as possible toward electrification, but system expansion, bus expansion is still critical because it provides access and opportunity for communities. Jarrett Walker, who is a well-known transportation analyst, has talked about circles of opportunity. What those are is the idea that most people will bear about a 45-minute one-way commute to look for jobs, to go to school, and to have other opportunities. And if you look at low-income communities in Newark, in New York, in Long Island, in other cities, you will see that that 45-minute circle is very, very small. And that's because bus service isn't adequate, it's not fast enough, it's not good enough. We have to prioritize bus service if we're going to actually see this work. Along with that, we need to make sure that we're not just expanding geographic access to transit, but that we're expanding financial access to transit. In New York, when I was deputy director of the Riders Alliance, we launched the Fair Fares campaign with Community Service Society and a number of partners across advocates for low-income residents and advocates for transit and advocates for the EJ community. The end result of that campaign was a program that provides half-price Metro cards for anybody at or below the poverty line. We need to see programs like this expanded to more regions so that people who need to ride the bus don't feel like that bus score is a barrier, but that it is instead a point where they can cross through because they can access it for affordable rates every single time. I also want to mention the Complete Streets program, which we've already heard a lot about today. But one thing that we need to make sure that we build into Complete Streets programs is equity, and that those streets, the redesigns, and the safety benefits of Complete Streets actually reach into communities that need them the most. Because the place where you find a lot of pedestrians, the place where you find a lot of people who want other options, the place where you find a lot of people who don't have cars is in low-income communities, and that's where Complete Streets is often not reached far enough. So one thing that we're working on with the New Jersey Department of Transportation that we'd love to see expanded statewide and in fact outside of New Jersey is some updates to Complete Streets that we call Complete and Green Streets that bring in components of health, equity, and environmental sustainability to the Complete Streets model. We feel that this will make sure that streets aren't just safe for everybody who uses them, but that they also take into account communities that need them and make sure that they have the environmental and health benefits that we think Complete Streets can bring to everybody. And I want to make a point about a lot of the policies that I'm talking about. TCI can fund the policies that I'm discussing, but it's also incredibly important that TCI play nice with other policies that are taking shape right now. Congestion pricing is one that has certainly come up today a number of times, and it's incredibly important that we make sure that these policies can work in coordination with one another so that the goals of increasing our reliance on transit and decreasing our reliance on cars goes hand in hand with each of the policies that we pass. Similarly, the Community and Climate Protection Act, spearheaded by New York Renews, is another policy that can dovetail well with something like TCI, as long as we put the effort in to make sure that these community-driven policies synchronize with the work that we're doing here today. And I'll close by saying that these goals are achievable if we organize. And so one thing that we're committed to at Tri-State is making sure that we are organizing in the communities that need their voices heard. And that means that we need to make sure that these communities aren't just at the table, but are leading the table. And so that's why we're making the commitment to make sure that we are working within communities and making sure that those communities' voices are the ones that are front and center in the work that we do on transportation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. I'm going to invite Sarah. Leaving.
Thank you, Nick, for making most of the main points that I want to make in my presentation. Excited to hear that we have common goals. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Levy, and I'm the Transit Justice and Environmental Justice Organizer with Green Roots, which is a grassroots organization in Chelsea, Massachusetts. For those of you who are not familiar with Chelsea, so Chelsea is one of the densest municipalities in the state of Massachusetts. There are over 45,000 residents in 2.5 square miles. 73% of the population are ethnic minorities, and 24% live under the poverty line. Oh, there we go. Got it. Okay. So Chelsea, like many other EJ communities that have been mentioned today, bears a huge environmental burden, not just for the Boston area, but for the state and the New England region. So you can see in this picture a few of the examples. So first of all, Chelsea is split up by Route 1 and the Tobin Bridge, which are two major thoroughways between North Shore and Boston. It also has one of the largest fruit and vegetable distribution centers in the country, which brings hundreds of diesel-fueled trucks through Chelsea every single day. Chelsea also houses all of the jet fuel that's used by Logan Airport, as well as 3/4 of the region's home heating fuel supply. And because of all of this, we have some of the worst air quality in the state, the highest rates of asthma hospitalizations of any community in Massachusetts. So despite Chelsea's density, Chelsea is really, really poorly served by quality, accessible, affordable public transportation. So this is a nice picture of what the typical commute on the Tobin Bridge looks like. You can see one bus and a ton of cars. People who have a choice will pretty much always choose their car over the unreliable buses. And people who don't, which are a lot of folks in Chelsea who are transit dependent, are stuck on slow buses that, depending on the congestion, could take as long as an hour and a half to travel less than 2 miles. We need to be looking at solutions that, as other folks have said, address historical and current inequalities and result in social and economic benefits as well as environmental. And so EVs are really not the answer. I think electrifying bus fleets is a wonderful thing, but in terms of individual electric vehicles, ultimately that won't really solve the congestion issues that you see in Chelsea and a lot of other communities in that previous picture. And they're very inaccessible to a lot of people. I think we're far from making EVs accessible, fully accessible to low-income communities. And people will be wedded to their cars regardless of rising costs if they have no reasonable alternative. So we need to be investing in our public transportation systems to make sure that they're more reliable, accessible, and affordable. And this kind of investment really furthers the goal of equity more than any cap and trade program could do on its own, and provides mobility for low-income communities and communities of color, many of whose residents depend on public transportation. Thank you. And I just want to also mention that some of the folks in Chelsea who depend on the buses most are seniors and our youth. And those are two groups of folks I feel like those voices have not been represented in this room. So in terms of thinking about moving forwards, I think that's an important thing to think about is making sure that folks who are most dependent on public transportation, seniors and youth, are included in this process. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? So now I think I just sort of signed. Probably have time for just one question to the panel, and anyone can answer this. So thinking in light of what was said today about, I guess, community engagement and when we do it in the process, earlier rather than later, I just wanted to pose the question to the panelists. If they can help us answer this would be helpful. What are the ways in which community members can be at the center of the policy development process, and how can states support community-led investments to improve transportation and equity? I wanted to elaborate.
I think one of the first things would be making these types of meetings accessible to communities. So often, as someone mentioned earlier, often these meetings are held middle of the day. I mean, this is middle of the week too. And I was able to travel to this workshop today because I get paid for this. But a lot of communities are working with our organization as volunteers. And have full-time jobs, multiple full-time jobs. So I think that making meetings like this in the evening, on the weekends, and more accessible locations, providing interpretation and doing outreach in other languages, because that's another huge voice that I haven't heard anything from about different languages. And yeah, so I think language access is a huge piece that's also really missing from the room, and I think that outreach and organizing of these meetings could start to address that.
I just want to echo that. I think this was a good first step forward, but we really want to get into community engagement, particularly in each of the states. I feel like some of this, because it's been so regional in nature, it's really hard for people to travel from all over the region to these midday, midweek meetings. And so to do real community engaged work, I think there needs to be good partnerships between the states and the groups on the ground and close to communities, and bringing these issues, closer to folks who are impacted, and getting, real input from them early in the process. I think it's going to be much more difficult to do that if you come with already like a baked thing where you're just like, give us input, because I feel people might judge that the amount of leverage or impact that they can make in that process is lessened. So why invest that time and energy? And I think that was a question that Dr. Sheets brought up earlier. Is, as an environmental justice movement, we have to kind of assess, like, where are all of you in this process as states, as TCI, and what are the real leverage points for engaging in meaningful and substantive conversations, having gotten to the point where we are now. So, there's a real question mark, I think, about is there still time to have that meaningful engagement, and can states take a step back and make the time in the process to engage more of the community?
I would echo all of that, but I would also add that I don't think states lack, for the most part, the know-how. I think what they lack is a lack of diversity and inclusiveness. And thus, when it comes to engaging with the populations that they're trying to engage with, their staff don't reflect the communities in which they're trying to engage. For instance, I never have any challenges around engaging with people of color, because I am one, so I understand what the historic barriers or what the commonalities are. Unfortunately, when we look around in many of these organizations, there's a lack of diversity among the staff. And then secondly, I would add, we're dealing with the difference between empathy and apathy and ignorance. Ignorance is when you don't know. Many of them know. Apathy is when you just don't care. Few don't care. But what we need is a greater emphasis on empathy so that we can see each other as human and understand the importance of engagement.
thank you all for the comments. It's definitely a lessons learned. I just wanted to say, so since the next listening session is going to be in Baltimore, we have about, oh gosh, about maybe 2 months to hopefully see how we can improve on that process. And so I've been talking to some community folks here that will hopefully help us get to that place. So thanks to our panel for the great input. And now I'm going to invite Bernice Miller Travis up again, and she's going to usher us into the, I guess, the final roundtable discussion.
I want to say to Anna and to everyone that I completely agree. My point was, as the moderator, you are the one tasked with keeping people on time and on task. And we were way over time. Somehow, miraculously, we got back on schedule. I think it's because we talked and ate at the same time, but I felt the energy shift when we went into these conversations and with the recommendations that came forward, that we seem to be really coming together of a purpose and a mindset that the equity issues are paramount in this conversation. If we miss this opportunity, we will really do a disservice to our region and to all the people who are served in these communities. So I agree with Anna. We are where we're supposed to be, and you can feel, can you feel it? Because I can feel the energy has shifted from where it was this morning. Do you feel that? Hello, hello? Yes, no? Okay, it's because you did that. And these panels and these discussions and the work that was done with New Jersey DEP, and I don't see Catherine still in the room, but I hope somebody will reflect back to Catherine what was said, that the initiative to stop the process and talk to communities and work with EJ stakeholders and rethink the agenda so that you can have this kind of conversation is critically important. And maybe we can shift the TCI trajectory to think like this about a process going forward, wherever those meetings are going to be, that we might get to some better outcomes and we might build the base of people who are going to take this work forward. So it's something to think about, because it certainly has been a really great dynamic here in this room. So thank you, Anna, and thank you all the people, all the EJ folks, all the stakeholders, all the folks at New Jersey DEP who came together to sort of rethink this agenda. I hear that Boston was not necessarily the most dynamic setting we've ever been in. And so here we are learning lessons, and that's what you always want to do, is be able to learn lessons and move forward. So here we are at the 2:30 moment on our agenda, which gives us the opportunity to have another round of discussion, right? So now we're going to have another round of facilitated table discussions. This one, what are your priorities for transportation investments and policies to address climate and environmental justice goals? We just heard a bunch of recommendations from the panel that was just had. We want you to talk more about that, get more specific, pull those items out, lift them up, give some ideas and put them on your Post-it notes. And again, same process that we just went forward in the previous round of report outs, we're going to do again and again. It's going to be the even number tables, 2 through 12 are going to report out. Same process. I'm sorry. Let me get your mic.
Thank you. At table 12, question 1, we have really two big areas that most of the comments focused on what the how can states ensure investments work to meet your needs and interests and the needs of stakeholders such as those in the room today. A number of comments focused on planning and engagement, and not just one-time engagement, but continuous, early and often engagement and investment at the planning process level, but also at the investment level, making sure that investment decisions are informed from the local level. And then also on the funding criteria, making sure that funding criteria for any investments are based on need, historic and ongoing impact, and are accountable.
Thank you.
And for question 2, I'll focus a lot of the comments there were on all different aspects of the transit system, including electrification of priority transit routes, lower fares, transit-oriented development, and expanded service, and faster service.
Thank you. How many people in the audience agree or concur with those recommendations? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, table 12. Table 10.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm going very far away. So our
No, we just trying to think.
Okay, so we had really great discussions at our table, and unfortunately, we had to cut it off a little bit. So I hope these discussions continue later. So we talked a lot about, similar to what table 12 had said, with the planning process and making sure that all these groups are included as we go throughout the day-to-day, and looking at kind of a holistic approach to mitigate emissions, not looking specifically just at vehicles, but potentially looking at VNT and et cetera. And then also when we're looking at investments, making sure that the investments don't cancel each other out. And looking at and prioritizing the people who are already in those communities and making sure that they're not displaced by any potential investments or programs that are moving forward, and also prioritizing rural mobility. So then for question number 2, so we came up with a lot of really good and interesting programs that have been successful so far that we should consider. We heard a lot about CARB and the great work that California is doing, so looking at some of their programs that they have already, and then talking about utility electric vehicle charging investment, to making sure it's putting a downward pressure on electricity rates for all ratepayers. And then finally, somebody said regulation, don't be afraid to use it. So.
Okay, regulation, don't be afraid to use it, okay? You have power and authority. Use the power and authority for good, right? Thank you, table 10. Table 8. Table 8.
All right, so here's our quick report out for table 8. For question 1, we talked a lot about kind of the importance of obviously engaging and listening to EJ communities, but we wanted to go beyond kind of the feel-good language to ensure that we have community benefit agreements signed. So the idea of codifying that engagement to ensure that you have community, not only community engagement, but community decision-making process as part of an engagement. We talked about kind of bus electrification as a screen for making sure that EJ communities are the places where investments happen first. Second, making sure there's accountability and having a clear timeline on those investments. And then also just making sure that we are ensuring those investments are happening on a timely basis. And we kind of referenced the Volkswagen settlement as being a kind of a good example that all of our states are dealing with right now. And then finally, we spent a lot of time talking about grant writing and the importance of streamlining the grant-making process and empowering environmental justice groups with resources to be able to get more dollars in hand and make it easier, not only for environmental justice groups, but for municipalities that might not have the resources at their fingertips to be able to apply for grant dollars. For question 2, we spent a lot of time actually talking about Bay State and the examples specifically of their work to reduce fares for bike sharing. They focus on walkable and bikeable communities, as well as just the strength of the complete streets policy. We also talked about the kind of excellent model in Massachusetts of having public health tracking using CDC data, and having that data on a local level and include public health and climate impacts. We also had a little love from New Jersey talking about the success of Access Link, so the ability to get disabled residents a bus literally at the doorstep to be able to take them where they need to go. And so obviously that's incredibly important in cities, but also allows EJ communities in more rural areas access to transit. And then finally, on question 2, we talked about the importance of enhancing existing partnerships. So we talked a little bit about California and their success at using the Charge Ahead initiative with partnerships with environmental groups and environmental justice organizations, as well as the work to create ride-sharing programs that aren't kind of an Uber and Lyft, but actually are driven by community organizations and run by the community, specifically the work out in Central Valley. And the importance there is obviously enhancing partnerships that are already existing. So,
thank you. How many people resonate with those recommendations? I'm going to ask table 8, table 10, if you could, table 10, hello, report outer, hi. Can you just quickly encapsulate them again, because I didn't ask people to let us know if they resonate with, could you just report them out again, quickly? Yes, use your power with regulation.
So we talked about looking at a holistic approach of investment and looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in different sectors, and then making sure investments don't cancel each other out when we're looking at that, and prioritizing communities that are already in the areas, making sure they're not pushed out, and then prioritizing rural mobility.
How many people resonate with those recommendations? Table 6.
Hi. Hello. So I'll keep it brief because I feel like we're going to say points that are similar to what I said before. For question 1, we focused on a ground-up approach to deciding on investments and identifying needs of the community. To do that is to engage extensively with the stakeholders and community groups within a region, and that takes a lot of work. So we want to emphasize the amount of resources it takes for states, and that a good portion of the revenue should be allocated directly for that cause to make these investments as impactful as possible, if that matters. For the second question, we talked about, there's a wide variety of programs we can talk about, but I think the learning lesson that we had from that is that there are a lot of projects that are already happening that we can learn from, or that we can directly build an investment for that are already working. And also others that we can examine from other places like California's Strategic Growth Council. And that having those shovel-ready projects that are already on the ground or ready to go once this program starts will be a useful tool to, 1, get the benefits rolling right away, and maybe shave off a couple years of learning lessons that we've already had to pay.
Thank you. How many folks resonate with those recommendations? Thank you. Thank you so much. Table 4.
Okay, so we talked about a lot of stuff that was similar to table 6, actually. So I'll be brief, but we talked about slowing down the process to make sure that frontline communities are actually at the table, making sure that investments actually meet the needs of the communities that are most impacted is to follow their lead. And to not undermine the work that's already ongoing in the same transportation space. We also talked about using funding for a regional statewide transportation equity analysis, and then also a needs analysis for folks, which are slightly different things. And for the second question, we talked about the youth pass in the Boston area, and that should be expanded to a fair fare policy. That's just so it's a discounted fare for low-income folks, and incentives that aren't necessarily related to transportation for transit riders, like the Logan shuttle that you can take from several places in the city that actually allows you to be in a shorter security line,
with the caveat that that needs to be expanded to serve communities other than just Back Bay and some of the wealthier, whiter areas.
How many folks resonate with those recommendations? Excellent, thank you. Last but not, no, that was 6, right?
This is 4, we got 2 over here.
And my table, table 2.
Okay, so question 1, some of the themes we heard were we want community engagement throughout the entire program development process and through program review processes. Mandate emissions reductions and percentages of funds to be reinvested in impacted communities, frontline communities, and building a system that is both transparent and accountable in terms of the investments, putting together metrics to track the success of those investments. For question 2, broadly, we thought expanded regional bus transit and overall transit service investment expansion would be a good form. We also like the idea of dial-a-ride and ride board opportunities to match commuters with similar destinations. That particularly lines up well for rural communities. And then some of the other ideas were congestion pricing, fare capping for public transit, youth, elderly transit passes, and city bike share expansion, as well as a comprehensive evaluation of public health and environmental impacts for future transportation projects.
Thank you. How many people like those recommendations? Show of hands. Excellent. Thank you all for all this energy, for all the intellectual output, for all this precious capturing of the recommendations and channeling the thoughts of the people who you work with, who can't be in the room with us right now, but whose voices need to be heard. Thank you for pulling all of that together. If I could just make a recommendation about how we collect the notes. Make sure that you have the table number on each page, and then number the pages 1, 2, 3, whatever, just so it'll make it easier for the people who are going to collate the notes afterwards. Thank you all so much. Yes? You're welcome. I want to invite Michelle Roberts, Melissa Miles, and Cynthia Mellon to come and give us some reflections on the day.
How's everyone feeling right now? You're okay? Are we there? I don't hear anyone. So, my name is Michelle Roberts. I'm the National Coordinator for the Environmental Justice Health Alliance for Chemical Policy Reform. We lovingly refer to ourselves as EJHA, but I wanted to give you the whole title because it's important based on what we heard about cumulative impacts, legacy communities, racism, being left out of the conversation until the conversation is all the way down the road. Understanding that we must be able to document all of our data. Understanding that we must become experts, and then we're told we're vulnerable, don't know much, and come in cantankerous and complaining. Representing communities who have been pushed against the margin. Communities who have a proliferation of some of the nation's most egregious industrial activities. Not because of the fact, yes, there are communities who do not have that political capital, but let's date it back to the nasty stain in this country of legislative segregation. At one point, regulations were okay. So today we're here to talk about how we flip the script on regulations to make sure the very least of these are at the front and at the beginning of conversations. We all know in the land of environmental justice, one of the agencies that came kicking and screaming, as Bernice Miller Travis says at times, we had to pull them kicking and screaming to come into the conversation, and they still aren't there. And now almost 30 years of the environmental justice movement is transportation. And today we're going to come into a space and talk about how we're going to talk about equity, hand select brokers to bring communities to the table, and call those who have legacy at the last minute when the policy's already out the door. But the good news is the great state of New Jersey. Thank you, New Jersey, because you reached into your moral courage, you reached to your political courage, and you listened to the communities that said, this is not right. There is no justice in this, quote, equitable conversation. So we want to thank our family in New Jersey, we being that of legacy communities, the communities that we serve here on this podium today with our friends from CJA, from the Climate Justice Alliance, New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. And we hope that you all will really leave out of this room understanding that this process will continue to be flawed if it's not stalled. When you go home today, when you walk through the streets of Newark, New Jersey, not to be confused with Newark, Delaware. I'm originally from Delaware. Speaking of a transportation travesty, nightmare. I want you to look at the different people on the street that you walk by. And then I want you to think about the people who were in this room. And let that make your judgment as to whether the process will continue to be flawed if it's not stalled. People in disparate communities have solutions. It was the civil rights movement that turned transportation around when folks walked and walked and walked instead of sitting on the back of the bus. That situation had to be stalled because it was deeply flawed. So today we have another opportunity of bringing justice to transportation. And I have some sisters here. It gives me great joy to be up here with these two wonderful women who will talk to you about some of the solutions that we feel can be incorporated. Cynthia Leon of the Climate Justice Alliance and Melissa Miles of the Ironbound Community and New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. We will hear from them.
Good afternoon. As Michelle said, I'm the policy coordinator for the National Climate Justice Alliance, former worker at the former environmental justice organizer at Ironbound Community Corporation. And I'm part of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance as well. I can walk home from here. I want to recognize our members that are here. The Climate Justice Alliance links 67 organizations across the country, the vast majority of which are what we call base building groups, organizations that work right in their communities, and they are located in the most impacted communities and rural areas of the United States in terms of pollution and climate change. Working with us here today, I want to recognize ACE that traveled from Boston, Green Roots also that came from Boston, ICC, which is our member, New York, City Environmental Justice Alliance, and Uprose is our regional hub leader of the Northeast region. So several months ago when this finally really broke and we understood that conversations had been going on for a very long time that we hadn't been part of, we got together in the region and we formulated a set of principles. I know that Renee Reynolds earlier referred to them. These principles stand out because we have to recognize that work on transportation has been being done in this region, in the states, in the communities for years. And those solutions should not be supplanted or evaded or left out or unfunded because a regional project like this comes on stream. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen and recognize the great solutions that the communities have already come up with, including congestion pricing, which you heard about earlier, and also the Climate and Community Protection Act of New York State. If those types of programs go into effect, we would not need a TCI. They could solve it. Communities know how to do that. Any proposals for fees or penalties or any of that takes place should go into funding a just transition in our communities, which would mean that workers that are supplanted by changes don't get left behind, so that a true just transition can take place across the society. And programs like this, if they come on stream, have got to function in that way. I want to mention that we know from our members in California, we have many member groups in California, that the carbon trading law that is in effect, the program that is in effect, and when we talk about cap and trade, we're really talking about cap and trade and invest as it's being expressed in this project. The emissions reductions are not taking place in the real environmental justice communities that we talk about and which are our members. There is no way to make that happen, and we need to be very honest with ourselves about that. I want to mention that Indigenous people, which there are very many in this region, have not been part of this process. They are not here today, and I don't believe this should go forward without their consultation. We would like to see any report that comes forward from this withheld, held back until those groups are consulted and included. And I think that's a glaring oversight. So basically, I want to reiterate that our communities have been coming up with solutions for years. We have the solutions, and I think that we need to keep that very much in our sights. I thank everybody that put this together today. We have listened to each other. It was good. So let's keep it good. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I think I'm the last panelist of the day, which means I have a whole lot of time up here with you all. So I hope that you've all enjoyed the day. This is definitely markedly different from Boston. And let me introduce myself, back up a minute. So my name is Melissa Miles, and I'm the Environmental Justice Manager for Ironbound Community Corporation. Ironbound Community Corporation is a local community-based organization. We've been here in Newark for 50 years. We're celebrating 50 this year. Yes, it's okay. We're also members of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, the Climate Justice Alliance, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, and a bunch of other groups that work to save the world for you and me. So basically, I'm here to give, I'm going to give a little bit more context and also add on to what you've been hearing throughout the day and just uplift some points that I think could bear repeating. So just to pick up where Cynthia left off,
part of the reason why we feel it's so important to engage indigenous groups that are working in the area of environmental and climate justice is because really indigenous folks, their communities are on the front lines of extraction. When we talk about a just transition, we're talking about an entire system that is based on the extraction of fossil fuels, which we know that in itself is another driver of climate change, and also displacement and the end to communities and their ways of being, polluting their water, their air, their land. So we think it's really important that we not take problems and issues in isolation, that we really look at them throughout the cycles of who was impacted along the way. So even when we talk about energy and energy infrastructure, this region of Newark houses a chunk of the region's energy infrastructure. So even when we're talking about energy, somewhere along the line, even that energy has to come from somewhere. So we don't isolate issues. We look at them as an entire system, and we're looking to actually change this entire system. The entire system that's actually based on capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, male domination, all those isms, all come to bear in here. So we're looking at how can we, piece by piece dismantle that system. And this is just a piece of that for us, but we feel a very important piece, which is why, we basically, banded together to make sure that we had environmental justice as well as other frontline communities here in the room today and in Boston, where we weren't really invited, but we came anyway with our questions and our concerns, because it really is of utmost importance that we always, speak to the communities that are most impacted by these areas of infrastructure. So a few of the things that I thought could bear repeating from the day. One of the most amazing things that I noticed is that in the report backs, there really wasn't much talk about investments. There wasn't much talk about the market. What I heard were a lot of very creative ideas and solutions. I heard in the report backs, so much work that's already being done, as well as vision for the future, which made me feel very hopeful that, within this room, lies answers that don't involve trading carbon, which, for many of our allies is akin to selling air, which is akin basically to paying, for pollution. Which we know is a flawed system, actually. Let's not recreate flawed systems. We know here in Newark what it means to have to fight permit by permit because industries are allowed, to emit hundreds and thousands of tons of criteria pollutants. They're allowed by law. We know what it's like to have to fight that on a case-by-case basis. It's a flawed system. It already exists, but it's flawed. So, it's in our interest not to recreate the flaws that allow polluters with big pockets to continue to pollute and communities, to continue to bear that burden. So it really made me feel hopeful that there were so many creative ideas and solutions that came out of the roundtables. And I really, want to impress upon us that we, begin to look for the alternative to this particular mechanism. Another thing that I thought was really interesting is that, or not interesting, but actually the idea that that climate policy needs to also have some sort of financial or market mechanism attached to it. There was a comment earlier in the day where it was mentioned that, our climate policies, our climate solutions also have to help our cities in our state to be able to maintain a state of repair. It is a great thing when climate policy, climate solutions can also help resiliency, but I don't think we should necessarily demand that. The most aggressive and progressive solutions to the current climate policy may not be attached to revenue generation. So I want actually to detach those two ideas. I think that that kind of thinking is actually, unfortunately, part of the problem. Too often we're willing to put a price on people's health and well-being, on their access to clean air and clean water and healthy food. And those are things that actually are priceless, and they're not even ours to price or to sell. So I actually, hope that we can detach those two ideas. And then the last thing is that ultimately, I'm going to echo my colleagues who are suggesting that this particular process slow down. The idea that regions, are meeting in this way is absolutely critical. It's amazing. At the same time, the most sustainable solutions are always going to be seen on a grassroots level and a community level, right? The real solutions to, globalization of everything is that communities, have the power and have the resource to be able to maintain themselves, to take care of their own waste, so they're not shipping it to other states, to grow their own food. So, they're not buying it from other countries, and polluting people in the process. So many of those solutions that are at the community level, will be both conceived of and enacted at the community level with the help of allies and supporters and government. So, it's really important that, as the states come together, that we have real community engagement through community-based organizations, that the next stakeholder meeting, I think really should be a community-based stakeholder meeting, where, real folks are brought to the table and provided with the information they need to also contribute to this conversation. And so, lastly, again, there are alternatives, and, I really hope that we will continue to use our creativity to envision a better future for our region. Thank you.
So we've been told this space is open now before we have other folks coming. Okay. Yeah. Do we have, how many do we have? Great. And as the mic is being passed to him, one thing is, I want us to think about too, as I was sitting here, the day after, the weekend of Thanksgiving, I'll make this very brief. The Delaware Memorial Bridge was shut down for 6.5 hours. The first time in the history of the bridge was shut down because of an ethylene oxide leak. That's very important, because for those 6.5 hours, the traffic went through environmental justice communities. Those communities were next door to the ethylene oxide leak. So while they were more concerned about the cars that were going across the bridge, that might have been impacted by the leak. Now let's think about this very carcinogenic, high flammable gas that was leaking. Cars were being moved through an environmental justice corridor. Communities were not notified. It was a horrible way for them to be notified. Many found that on the 11 o'clock news later that night. This is cumulative impacts at its best, as we were talking about, and the reason why our fence line, front line communities really need to be at the table. Sir.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Larry Cobb. I'm the Georgia Public Transportation. I'm the Title 6 liaison for the state of New Jersey. My job is to ensure public outreach and the policy of the state of New Jersey and federal government. And I say today, my first time coming to something like this for statewide, different states, but I noticed some things that I was listening that I didn't hear anything about a plan for actually getting the public involved with what we do. And that's very important. The first step is always open for the public to be involved first. And now as I said, I took notes, I noticed that in the federal regulations, Title VI has had to be mandated. It's a mandated program. Title VI, Environmental Justice, LEP, ADA, relocation, those are federal mandated programs. You have to mandate those, they have to be followed in every state in the United States. So, but I didn't hear anything about that. So without a plan, we can't go nowhere. So I think that the TCI, we just sit down together collectively and develop a plan on how we do this outreach for these environmental justice challenges communities. Because a lot of people don't know about this. I never knew about it. My background is engineering. For 34 years I was an engineer. So I changed careers in the last year. But as I sat there, I look and I hear how important this is to other people. It's very important to us. So without the initial buy-in from the public, this would never work. Great ideas, but from the grassroots people, the grassroots communities, they're affected by all this, not us. We live up in the hills. I'm just saying that. I live in the grassroots community, but I'm saying they don't know. So even today, this still been like an LEP. Suppose somebody here who couldn't speak English, right? Or even Spanish. Where's the information that for them to know? That's a violation of the federal government. So whenever you do any kind of thing like this, if people from different nationalities, origins, you have to have their language available to them in case they can't speak English or interpret or something. But this is what I'm saying. Without a plan, I like all the ideas I heard. Without a plan, this ain't gonna never work. All right?
Thank you so very much. Thank you. And so now it gives me great pleasure to pass this over to the report out and next steps for community engagement and investigation of EJ and equity considerations by Allison Acevedo, Director of Environmental Justice at PA, Pennsylvania DEP, and Chris Box, Chief Deputy at Virginia DEP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Just thank you so much, everybody, for this opportunity just to come here and talk about these issues in an open forum, in an open space. So this is really a good opportunity for me just to see people from different states come together, people from different communities come together and talk about the issue in an open way. So one of the things that we saw here today is that people were able to express how we felt, how be inclusive about the issue, and really think about how we structure an agenda moving forward that's inclusive of many voices and voices that are going to be meaningfully heard. So as the last person just said, having a plan is critical. So when we think about outreach, we want to think about outreach in a way that includes the meaningful participation, but also includes learning opportunities for both the states and for the community. So part of what was said today is it makes us think about how we have to be urgent as we're state agencies, as we're state policymakers, how we have to be urgent about thinking about environmental justice, equity issues in investment and with TCI as we move forward. So thank you for allowing us the opportunity to
to really think about the inclusiveness and think about the urgency. So also wanted to be proactive. I think we also have to think about this, as somebody mentioned, the house was on fire, thinking about how we be proactive about this process moving forward and how we are strategic and really thinking about what the process is and understanding that it takes time. We're a little bit over now, we're not going to be too much over, but really thinking about how this type of process takes time. And also wanted to emphasize too, I'm from a state that just started this process, that in some respects, it's at the beginning of the process. So our state, Pennsylvania, really just started, wanted to emphasize that for some folks here, we're just starting the process. So actually this is a great time to be engaged in the process. Really, some of the states are thinking through all of these issues, and we're collectively just beginning to gel as a group, thinking about the issues with TCI. So it's a great opportunity for us to collectively work on these issues. So just wanted to again thank everybody for this vibrancy and discussion, this collective discussion, and just wanted to continue to really put EJ in the framing of the agenda that we're doing. So when we're talking about work that we're doing here at TCI, to really include EJ as part of the agenda, part of the outcomes, and part of the policy. I'll turn it over to Chris.
Allison, and I just want to emphasize, like Allison said, Virginia, in addition to being a Commonwealth like Pennsylvania, we are also pretty brand new to TCI, and so it is early in the process for us as well. I'm really excited to have a couple of folks from Virginia here. Karen, thank you for coming. Ross, thank you for coming. In addition to some Virginia staff, and we're really excited to get going. And you know, I think like Allison was saying, for a lot of us, we are just starting to come together to figure out, okay, what are different regional approaches that we can do in concert with each other to drive down emissions, to center equity, to build a more robust, resilient, safe, efficient, clean, and equitable transportation system. So, you know, there is still time for us to work together, to work with you, to work with others in the region, to develop a regional policy proposal that addresses both urgent challenges of transportation pollution and transportation equity. We think we can do those together at the same time. Most importantly, we want to learn from the California experience. Thank you, Michelle, for being here to speak a little bit to that. And to everybody who has had experiences in California and other states, we can learn from those experiences and develop a proposal that once we get to implementation, we're addressing these issues and has a process in place that can enable communities and that can enable all of our residents to have the tools they need to develop and implement projects that benefit their own communities. And so as far as what's next for the states, you know, what you can look for as you either in New Jersey or go back to your own states, we're going to be moving forward with our own processes in each state. One thing that I thought was really interesting about this workshop is it was part regional in scope, part high-level approaches and best practices that we all ought to take home with us in our own states, and part really specific New Jersey exercise and how all these things are happening on the ground. And so I think all of us can learn from both parts of that of the workshop as we go forward, and I'm excited to do that as we go home back to Virginia. You know, each state has unique needs, unique stakeholders, unique transportation system, and each state also has its own unique legal frameworks that we all also need to evaluate to understand what we can do now, and then what we'll need to go get authority to do. One of the exercises that we're going through at home right now at DEQ is figuring out how do we expand our authority to do more cool stuff. And that's going to mean pursuing legislation or pursuing opinions from the Attorney General's office or expanding our regulatory authority through board action. There are a number of things, as we talked about today, that we can do to reduce pollution and center equity, but we also have to understand what we can do now and what we're going to need to go get authority to do. So we look forward to communicating that with you all as we go forward. Regardless of what we do know that to benefit the communities, we need to work with communities. And so as a region, we're going to be supporting each other, the states, as we do that, and as we move forward with our process. And speaking of that, I wanted to leave you with 2 dates, I think that were mentioned earlier, but just so everybody has them available. May 23rd, there will be a webinar that will dig into the modeling assumptions that are going to be used for the first round of modeling to look at a cap and invest proposal. That's May 23rd. I think details of that are on the Transportation and Climate Initiative website. And then July 30th in Baltimore is the next regional workshop focused on investments and ways to use potential proceeds and different strategies to reduce pollution in all of our states. So with that, I will turn it over to Debbie to provide some closing remarks. And thank you all very much.
I promise I'm the last person of the day, but I'm also saying thank you to all of you for sticking it out in the first sunny day we've had in New Jersey in a while. We pulled this together very quickly, and thanks to our facilitators and our resource folks here at NJIT, and we really appreciate this great space, which they donated to us, so thank you for that, Sean. And of course, my colleagues at New Jersey DEP and NJDOT, thank you for putting up with us. And a special thanks to the member states, the EJ advocates, and Georgetown Climate Center for doing a really participatory agenda that had a lot of flexibility and a lot of uncertainty around it. Jeff was at Kinko's at like 11 o'clock last night, you know, printing out the agenda. That's how tight we were. So that takes a lot of trust, which we really still have to build up a lot, I know, through this process. So thank you all for that. We have a website that everything that Chris talked about will be up there. It's a great way to keep up to date. There's an online portal to submit additional comments. I just really want to affirm a few things. There's still time to shape the design of the TCI option. But to me, more importantly, we heard about issues that are really about a broader range about climate change and EJ that we need to take action on now, whether they're new laws, new regulations, new policies, or other things, specifically that look at reductions from pollution in communities that have been the most burdened. And now in the states, I mean, you really had a captive audience here. We all go back to our states. This is where it has to happen with all the rollbacks at the federal level. We have to be working together creatively in our communities and in our states to do this. We're worried we're going to lose our mileage for vehicles, right? If California's standard gets taken out from under us. So these are the types of things that we have to be acting on now. We will, as we mentioned, be still doing further community outreach. And I know I learned a lot. I always learn a lot listening to everyone about how we can further shape what that outreach looks like in our states. And we'll figure that out together. And I used to be running a nonprofit, just last year, and then came into the Governor Murphy administration. And so now I'm on the other side of the table, but I don't want to be on the other side of the table. I want to be on your table, right? So I can't do my job at the state unless we're listening and we're all listening to each other. So at some point, the day has been uncomfortable for us, right? That's fine. That is okay. It's a hard topic, and unless we have these really honest and transparent conversations, we're not going to be able to address it. So thank you very much for all your time. It's very valuable, and we really appreciate it. And I think that's it. We'll stick around if you have any further questions, but you're free to go. Thanks.
Facilitators, please make sure to collect the evaluations and the yellow and blue sheets and bring them up to the front table, table 12. Thank you.